They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. They talk about the flowers, the white dress, and the way your heart skips a beat when you see the person you love waiting at the end of the aisle. But nobody tells you what it feels like when the person who is supposed to be your family decides to turn that dream into a living nightmare. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The lace of my gown was perfect, or at least it was supposed to be. For a moment, I actually believed I had won. I thought that after months of snide comments, passive-aggressive emails about the guest list, and constant remarks about how I wasn't quite the right fit for her son, I had finally made it to the finish line. I was wrong. Behind me, the door to the bridal suite creaked open. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. The air in the room always seemed to get 5 degrees colder whenever Evelyn walked in. She didn't say I looked beautiful. She didn't offer a hug. Instead, she clicked her tongue and smoothed out a non-existent wrinkle on her own dress, a dress that was so close to ivory it was practically a crime. She looked at me in the reflection, her eyes hard and cold, and whispered that it was all a bit much. She told me Mark always preferred things simple and that I was just putting on a production. I forced a smile, my hands shaking against my bouquet, and told her that Mark loved it. She gave a small, sharp laugh and told me that today would be a day nobody ever forgets. At the time, I thought she was just being bitter. I had no idea she was carrying a secret in her purse designed to destroy my reputation, my marriage, and my entire future in less than an hour. To understand how we got to that disastrous wedding day, we have to go back 3 years. When I first met Mark, I thought I had hit the jackpot. He was kind, hardworking, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. But there was always one shadow hanging over our relationship: his mother, Evelyn. The first time I met her for dinner, she spent 45 minutes talking about Mark's ex-girlfriend, Jessica. She talked about her like she was a saint, looking directly at my jeans with total disgust. Mark would always squeeze my hand under the table and tell me she was just protective. He told me she had a hard life and that once she got to know me, she'd love me. That is the biggest lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? That if we are just kinder and prove our worth, the person who hates us will change. I spent 2 years trying to win her over. I brought her flowers, remembered every holiday, and sat through hours of her pointing out how thin Mark used to be before he met me. The real trouble started the moment the ring was on my finger. The engagement party was supposed to be a small celebration, but Evelyn arrived late with a guest we hadn't invited, a high-profile divorce lawyer. Throughout the night, she made loud jokes about protecting family assets and how love is blind, but the law isn't. I was humiliated. My parents sat there listening to her imply I was a gold digger. When I confronted Mark, he just sighed and asked me to let it go, to keep the peace. But you can't keep the peace with someone who is at war with your existence. 6 months before the wedding, the suggestions turned into genuine sabotage. I had found the perfect vintage style gown. I had saved for a year to afford it. One afternoon, Evelyn called me, her voice sounding sweet for the first time ever. She told me she was at the bridal shop and had authorized a steam cleaning service for my gown. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I told her that specific lace couldn't be steamed. It had to be hand-pressed. She laughed and told me not to be dramatic. By the time I rushed to the shop, it was too late. The delicate lace on the bodice had shriveled and wrinkled. The manager looked pale, explaining that Evelyn had screamed at the staff until they complied. I sat on the floor and cried. When Mark arrived, first time I realized that Mark wasn't just stuck in the middle, he was being used as a shield. I went numb after that. I decided I would just survive the wedding and then move far away. But Evelyn wasn't done. She started calling my friends, asking concerned questions about my past, insinuating I had financial trouble or a wild streak in college. She was building a narrative that I was a liar and a manipulator. She was planting seeds of doubt everywhere, saving the biggest blow for the reception. What she didn't know was that my best friend, Chloe, had been recording every single one of those concerned phone calls. 2 weeks before the big day, I checked the RSVP list and saw a name I hadn't approved. Jessica, Mark's ex. Evelyn had used the password I gave her for the wedding website to invite the one person who shouldn't be there. When we called her, she claimed she ran into Jessica and felt it would be tacky not to include her, since she was like family. She told me that if I uninvited her, the whole town would talk about how insecure I was. She had trapped me. If I kicked Jessica out, I was the crazy wife. If I let her stay, I was letting Evelyn mark her territory. I didn't argue with Mark this time. I just went into the other room and called Chloe. I told her the ex was coming. Chloe told me she had just finished the final edit on a video. We had everything: the recordings, the security footage from the bridal shop, and the deleted emails. We were ready. The morning of the wedding was a blur of disasters. The caterer called saying Evelyn had downgraded our surf and turf menu to a basic vegan pasta because of allergies. The florist called because the centerpieces had been redirected to a warehouse 3 towns over. Every single detail was under attack. Evelyn wanted me to have a breakdown. She wanted me to scream and look unstable in front of the guests. But I stayed calm. I handled every crisis like a general. When Mark came into the suite saying his mother was in tears because I yelled at her, I didn't even fight him. I just told him to make sure she stayed in her seat because if one more thing went wrong, she would be the one crying, not me. The ceremony was beautiful in a way that felt like a lie. I saw Evelyn in the front row, wearing a dress that was almost white, dabbing at her dry eyes. Jessica was seated right in my line of sight. As I walked down the aisle, I realized Evelyn wasn't even looking at the ceremony. She was checking her watch, waiting for the reception. She had prepared a tribute video for us. She told Mark it was childhood photos, but Chloe had found out the truth. It was a montage of Mark and Jessica's old relationship, meant to humiliate me in front of 200 people. We exchanged vows, promising to love each other above all others. When those words were spoken, I saw Evelyn's jaw tighten. As we walked back down the aisle, she caught my arm and whispered that I should enjoy my moment because it was the last one I would ever get. I didn't flinch. I just walked toward the reception hall, knowing that I had hired the AV team myself this time. The reception hall was breathtaking, a sea of white lilies and shimmering gold. But to me, it felt like the final stage of a long and grueling war. Every time I smiled for a photo, I felt the weight of the secret Chloe and I were carrying. Mark was glowing, blissfully unaware, greeting his colleagues and laughing with his cousins. He kept squeezing my hand, telling me how perfect everything was. And every time he did, my heart ached for the man who was about to have his world turned upside down. I looked over at the head table and saw Evelyn. She was in her element, holding court, sipping champagne, and looking at the large projection screens with a predatory glint in her eyes. She had been so insistent on this surprise presentation. She had told the wedding planner it was a gift from the heart, a way to welcome me into the family properly. I knew better. I knew that behind that smile was a woman who had spent thousands of dollars and months of her life trying to ensure I wouldn't be standing here by the end of the night. The music shifted, the upbeat dance tracks fading into a soft, expectant hum. The DJ tapped the microphone and the room began to settle. This was it. Evelyn stood up, her movements graceful and practiced, and walked to the center of the dance floor. The spotlight hit her, and for a moment she looked like the perfect mother-in-law. She spoke into the mic, her voice trembling with a fake emotion that would have fooled me a year ago. She talked about the importance of history, about how Mark had always been a boy who deserved the very best, and how she wanted everyone to see the true journey that led us to this day. She gestured toward the screens, and the lights dimmed to a total, heavy black. I felt Chloe's hand on my shoulder from behind my chair, a silent go signal. The screens didn't stay black for long, but instead of the soft, romantic music Evelyn expected, a harsh, buzzing sound filled the speakers. The first image wasn't a baby photo of Mark. It was a high-angle, grainy shot of a back room in a bridal boutique. The room went silent, instantly. On the screen, you could see Evelyn, her face twisted in a way that none of the guests had ever seen. She was screaming at a young girl, a shop assistant who looked like she was about to faint. The audio was crystal clear. We heard Evelyn demand that the lace be steamed, heard her call me a nameless nobody who wouldn't know the difference, and heard her laugh when the girl warned her it would ruin the dress. Good, Evelyn's voice boomed through the ballroom. Maybe she'll take the hint and realize she doesn't belong in this family. A gasp went through the room like a physical wave. I looked at Evelyn. She was frozen in the spotlight, her mouth hanging open, her skin turning a ghastly shade of gray. She tried to signal the DJ to stop it, but the DJ was one of Chloe's oldest friends, and he didn't move a muscle. The video cut to a series of screenshots, emails to the caterer, the florist, and the venue manager. Each one showed her forging my name, sabotaging the menu, and trying to redirect deliveries. But the final blow was the audio. A recording of a phone call she had made to Jessica, Mark's ex, just 3 days before the wedding. We heard Evelyn laughing, telling Jessica that Mark was just confused, and that once Jessica showed up at the wedding looking beautiful, he would realize his mistake and come crawling back. When the lights came up, the silence was more deafening than any music could have been. 200 people were staring at Evelyn Miller. Mark was standing now, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at his mother as if he was seeing a stranger, a monster wearing his mother's skin. Evelyn tried to scramble. She grabbed the microphone, her voice cracking as she shrieked that it was a lie, that I had used deep fake technology to frame her because I was jealous of her bond with her son. She ran toward Mark, her hands reaching out, but he stepped back so sharply she almost tripped. He didn't say a word to her. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears, and whispered, "How long have you been dealing with this?" I didn't answer him with words. I walked down to where Evelyn was standing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was the calmest person in the building. I told her, loud enough for every single person to hear, that her reign was over. I told her that she had spent 3 years trying to make me feel small. But in reality, she was the smallest person I had ever met. I informed her that the security team was already waiting at the doors and that she had exactly 60 seconds to leave before she was physically removed. She tried to turn to the guests, to her sisters and her friends, begging them to help her, but everyone looked away. Even Jessica, who had been sitting in the 3rd row, grabbed her purse and ran for the exit, unable to handle the shame of being exposed as a co-conspirator. The security guards stepped forward, and Evelyn finally realized that she had no moves left. She had played her hand, and she had lost everything. As they let her out, she screamed that we would regret this, that Mark would never survive without her. But as the heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind her, the air in the room suddenly felt light. It felt clean. Mark didn't go after her. He came to me, took my hands, and apologized in front of everyone. He promised that from this moment on, nobody, not even his own blood, would ever come between us again. But the story didn't end at the reception. 2 days later, while we were at our honeymoon cabin, the emergency calls started. Evelyn had checked herself into a hospital, claiming a broken heart had caused a cardiac event. It was her final play, the ultimate guilt trip. She expected Mark to drop everything, to fly home and sit by her bed and beg for forgiveness. But we had anticipated this. We called the hospital, spoke to a nurse who sounded very tired, and confirmed that Evelyn's vitals were perfect. She was just sitting in the bed, eating Jell-O, and calling everyone she knew to tell them how cruel we were. Mark didn't fly back. He didn't even call her. He sent a single text message that read, "The hospital bill is yours. The silence is mine. Do not contact us again." We spent the rest of our honeymoon in a peace I can't even describe. We blocked her on every platform. We changed our social media settings. We even decided to move our upcoming relocation date up by a month. Living without her influence was like waking up from a long, feverish dream. We realized how much of our relationship had been spent managing her emotions, and without that burden, we finally had the space to actually love each other. The moral of this journey isn't just about revenge. It's about the fact that family is a title that is earned, not a right that is given at birth. Just because someone gave you life doesn't give them the right to destroy yours. If you're standing in a storm created by a toxic relative, remember that you have the power to walk out of the rain. You are allowed to set boundaries that protect your soul. You are allowed to say no to people who only want to see you fail. My wedding day wasn't the day I became a wife. It was the day I became a person who was finally, truly free.